Let's move into our third and final main topic today. And our third and final main topic today gets submitted to us by Storm Johnson, who writes, "Hey, John and Rob." Hello there, Storm. "Big fan of the show. Did you see the news that Lionsgate is hoping to shoot both John Wick 4 and 5 directly after each other? At first, I thought this was an odd decision, but then I saw that the box office for each John Wick film gets better with each new release. My question is, do you think that this was on Lionsgate's mind when they made this decision? And do you think we will continue to see the box office increase with each sequel?" All right, man. Thanks a lot for sending that in. And yes, look, we knew that another John Wick was coming. Although we were surprised to find out when John Wick 3 came out, it wasn't a certainty that they were doing a 4 at the time. Like we found out since that, even though the movie kind of sets up a 4th and it would make sense, it wasn't locked in iron that they were going to do one. That's clearly no longer the case, as now not only are they committing to a 4th, they're committing to a 5th and apparently doing them back to back. This comes to us from Deadline that writes, "On today's Lionsgate's earnings call, the studio CEO, John, I'll never pronounce this right, Felthmeier, Felthmeier. Tell me that dude isn't from Lord of the Rings. Felthmeier. All right, the studio CEO, John Felthmeier, said, "We're also busy preparing scripts for the next 2 installments of our John Wick action franchise. With John Wick 4 slated to hit theaters Memorial Day of 2022, we hope to shoot both John Wick 4 and 5 back to back when Keanu becomes available next year." So that comes to us from Deadline. This is fantastic news. The John Wick franchise is, look, I'm not going to lie to you. I didn't like part 2 quite as much as I like part 1. I still like part 2 very much, don't get me wrong. And I was excited to see 3. 3 blew the roof off, though. 3 absolutely blew the roof off for me. I remember me and Ann went to go see it, and we were like, immediately after we left, we jumped on our AMC A-list apps and booked our next viewing of it because we had to go back and watch it again. And we saw it several times in theaters. I love part 3 very, very much. So it brings up the question, though, why do it back to back? You know, and is it because they maybe think they're going to see things? Because quite often, Rob, you don't want to be premature in this business, right? Like, that's why normally you don't hear about a sequel getting greenlit until the studio sees, you know what I mean, Rob? Like, until a studio sees that the first one was received pretty well and also made decent money at the box office. And then that's why it's big news when a movie studio will greenlight a sequel before the first one even comes out. Normally you wait to find out how this next one does, and then you commit. Because even just making that commitment to making the next movie, money starts to change hands immediately. As soon as you sign those deals and contracts, money starts changing hands. And if you don't end up making that next one after the sequel, you're out a lot of money for nothing. So they take it very seriously, and they do that. So let's look at this. Why would a studio want to look at doing it back to back? Why with John Wick? And what kind of precedent can we see? So let's step into the classroom here for a second, Rob. I know everybody loves going into the John Campea classroom for a second, but let's talk about this John Wick thing. John Wick 1, you got to remember, it wasn't a huge hit, but it made $86 million at the box office, right? The key part of that, and what got it a sequel, was that John Wick 1 only cost $20 million to make, right? So it made more than 4 times its budget at the box office. Now, you got to remember, too, when this movie first came out, nobody cared about it. Nobody was talking about John Wick. Keanu Reeves had kind of faded into obscurity again a little bit by that point. He wasn't really a name anymore. And then 1 month before John Wick came to theaters, the first trailer dropped. Just about 1 month before the movie came out is when they finally put out the first trailer. And all of a sudden, everybody's talking about it. The movie made $86 million, more than 4 times its budget. Okay, great. Well, now we fast forward to John Wick 2. That movie, this is the type of trend you like to see, made $171 million, nearly doubling what the first one made on a very humble $30 million budget. That means it made more than 5 times its budget. More than 5 times its budget. So you get the first one. You want to see these upward trajectories in box office. That tells you people love the first one. They're interested in this franchise. Made more than double the first one. And whereas the first one made 4 times its budget, this one made more than 5 times its budget. Okay, does the trend continue? Well, now we move into John Wick Chapter 3. And John Wick Chapter 3 pulled in $326 million. $326 million. Again, nearly doubling the previous one. This time on still a very modest $56 million budget, which means this time it made more than 6 times its budget. The first one made more than 4 times its budget. Second one made more than 5 times its budget. Third one made more than 6 times its budget. So when you're asking the question about how can Lionsgate feel comfortable and confident about greenlighting not just number 4, but greenlighting number 5 when they're not even sure how number 4 will go, these numbers are what stares Lionsgate in the face and says, okay, yeah, we can greenlit 5, and we feel pretty confident when you look at this literal exponential growth in the franchise. It's insane looking at those numbers. From 86 million, nearly doubling to 171, nearly doubling again to 326, and their return on investment kept going up. 4 times the budget, 5 times the budget, 6 times the budget, and they've always managed to keep the budgets really small. $56 million for that movie? I am assuming they might spend $70 million on the next one. Pretty interesting. Now, so they're going to shoot this thing back to back, which basically means they're going to go into production and shoot this thing like it's one movie. They're going to try to get all the production thing. So this isn't the first movie to do things like this. Lord of the Rings did this. 2 Pirates movies. I think it was At World's End. And what was the other one?
2 and 3.
Dead Men. Yeah, Dead Men. I think it's Dead Men Don't Tell No Tales. They did it back to back. Of course, Matrix 2 and 3 shot back to back. The final 2 Twilight things. I think it was called Breaking Dawn.
Infinity War and Endgame.
That's right. Breaking Dawn 1 and 2. Infinity and Endgame did it back to back. What were those Clint Eastwood movies? Flags of Our Father?
Sands of Iwo Jima and Flags of Our
Letters
Fathers.
from Iwo Jima.
Letters from Iwo Jima, yeah.
Letters
the
from
Sands of Iwo Jima. Letters from Iwo Jima.
And I think it's called Flags of Our Fathers. So that one was well. And many. Harry Potter, the final 2 Harry Potter films were shot back to back. So this is not the first time this has been done. I believe Back to the Future 2 and 3. I think Back to the Future 2 and 3 also did that. The question is why? Why do this? Well, I want to propose 4 reasons why a studio would be attracted to shooting back to back. All right. The first one is this. It offers you the opportunity for a shorter release gap. All right. A shorter release gap. Like when you make one movie and then it releases, has a theatrical run, then you write the script for the next one, go into pre-production. But you're talking 2, 3, 4, 5 years in between those movies, the first one and the second one. You lose a little bit of momentum. I remember when The Matrix 2 and 3 came out, because we had to wait a couple years for Matrix 2. But Matrix 2 came out, and I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Rob, I think it was only 5 months we had to wait for Matrix 3.
Yeah.
It was 5 or 6 months. They came. So the studio was able to capitalize on a shorter than normal release gap window. That's why Lord of the Rings could come out every year. Right? You didn't have to wait 2, 3, 4, 5 years as momentum lost. They're able to take, now that doesn't mean they'll automatically take advantage of the shorter release gap, but it does give them the opportunity for a shorter release gap. The next advantage is scheduling, right? One of the big hurdles that studios have to deal with in trying to get movies made is trying to figure out, okay, well, we've got The Rock in this movie. When's he available? He's not available till September in 3 years. Like it's scheduling. So if you can, in one stroke, block off and schedule your actors all at one time for 2 separate movies in a 5-month range instead of a 2.5-month range here and another 2.5 range there, it makes scheduling a hell of a lot easier to do it. So that's another thing. The third thing that why studios can look at doing this, did I spell that right? Efficiency. Efficiencies, right? So like you can create a set or say book a location. Let's say in John Wick Chapter 2, they shoot at this one location, and then they also have that location in John Wick Chapter 3. Well, guess what? Instead of bringing all of the cast and crew to that location, shooting that shot, breaking set, everybody leaving, going to do other things, and then 5 months later or a year or two later, have to come back to that location, reset everything up again, guess what? Now we can shoot scene 27 from John Wick Chapter 2 and scene 18 from John Wick Chapter 3 at the same time. I mean, it just creates traveling, saves tons of money. It just creates efficiencies for studios trying to make this movie. Now, parts 2 and 3 all lead to the fourth one, which is expense. It just makes it cheaper. When you can block off your talent, you can make everything as efficient as possible. You don't have to break and reset sets 3 times. You can just set it up once. Time is money, all that kind of stuff. It just makes it cheaper. And a studio can save millions, sometimes tens of millions of dollars by organizing their shoot that way to make sure that they get it all done and they get it all right and they do it as efficiently and quickly as possible. Because if you add up the time, Rob, of how long it would take to shoot part 2 and how long it would take to shoot part 3, it'll be shorter if you just shot 2 and 3 back to back. You'll end up with a shorter turnaround time. It saves you money. It's easier scheduling. It's more efficient. And it gives the studio the opportunity to have a shorter release date window. And the box office numbers prove, Rob, that committing to a John Wick 5, even though you haven't done 4 yet, is actually not that big of a risk. It's not that big of a risk when you look at Rob, that growth blows Marvel's numbers out of the water. That type of exponential growth is bigger than even Marvel's ever done. I mean, so to me, this makes sense. I think it is a smart move. I think it is a very limited risk move. And I think there's great historical precedence about why this is something Lionsgate should be doing. Hell, I wouldn't have blinked, Rob, if they said they were going to shoot 4, 5, and 6 back to back at this point. Anyway, Rob, you're hearing that Lionsgate CEO is saying we're going to do John Wick Chapter 4 and 5. We're going to shoot them back to back. Good move, bad move. What are some of the risks maybe of them doing this? How do you see this?
Well, there's one other thing that I wanted to point out to you too. That's another good reason for doing this is that it also allows for a creative storytelling opportunity that doesn't always exist when you're waiting 2 or 3 years to do a sequel. And that is you can design both movies to work together in tandem. Because even when, like, say, Empire Strikes Back came out, they didn't really know what was going to happen in Jedi. The script hadn't been written yet. So from a storytelling standpoint, they're going to construct a 2-part story that works together. And hopefully it would be, well, maybe more creatively satisfying when you have the movies linked together. I mean, one of the things that I loved about Infinity War and Endgame was that they're 2 different movies, but they worked in tandem together really well. And I don't know if they'd waited 3 years between films if Endgame would have been as satisfying. So I think that from a creative standpoint, it really allows the filmmakers and the writers to do something unique, which is an extra added incentive, which can give the audience a better experience, which hopefully will translate into bigger dollars at the box office. But I think it's a great idea John, I have to tell you, I was surprised in the wake of the Lord of the Rings films. I mean, obviously they had 3 books, so they knew what to do. But the fact that this isn't done more than it is. I mean, I understand it makes sense when you're multiple films into a franchise because it's already proven that it's going to be successful. I don't necessarily think that when you're making the first movie of a franchise, you should make 2 at the same time because you don't know if they're going to work. But for John Wick 4 and 5, after looking at the exponential growth of this franchise, it makes absolute sense to do this, as long as they have a good idea, as long as the script is good. You don't want it to not be good. But I'm a fan of this, and it makes me as a viewer, I'm more invested. Like, to be honest, I just picked up well, it was here. I just picked up the they released a 3-disc set of all 3 John Wick movies on 4K.
Really?
In a box set, which I just picked up, and I'm like, I'm invested in the John Wick franchise, and to know that there's 2 movies coming instead of 1, I now can anticipate a kick-ass cliffhanger, and I'm in, man. I think I'm stoked. Gets me excited.
Can you think? I mean, again, I just went through this entire huge list about why this is limited risk, why other films have done it, and why this is a good move. But can you think of any potential drawbacks here for doing this back to back? I mean, money can't be one. I suppose it come out. By the way, a few people in the live chat are writing in maybe another advantage for them on this. Well, Keanu Reeves drank the blood of a unicorn apparently about 25 years ago, to the point that he has barely aged a day in the last 2 decades. Keanu Reeves is starting to look like he's not 30 anymore. Oh, it's like he's in his 50s. He's finally starting to look like maybe he's not 30. It's crazy how good this guy looked. But he is, I mean, we're all aging, right? He's aging. So a few people point out in the live chat says, the other advantage shooting back to back is because, these movies so far have happened like within days of each other.
Right.
And Keanu does look older in the third one than he does in the first one. And that's only supposed to be a few days separated. The advantage is you're able to shoot him and you don't have to worry about, an issue of aging. So that's but can you think of any potential drawbacks to doing these things like this back to back?
No, unless, and I don't really want to say this, but let's say somebody gets injured, like Harrison Ford got injured when they were making Force Awakens, when the door landed on his foot or whatever, and you expect to make 2 movies instead of 1, that could be potentially damaging to a schedule and to money. But you can't, you can plan for that contingency, but that's not something you're really going to totally plan for. You're hoping that doesn't happen. But that's really the only downside. That and the fact that I would hope that when they make 2 movies, their scripts are ironclad. I hope it's not a situation where, we'll write part 2 as we're shooting part 1, or in this case, part 4. I hope they wouldn't do that. I hope when they go into John Wick 4 and 5, they're doing it because somebody pitched a great idea and they have a great concept for it. They know where part 4 is going to end, where part 5 is going to begin. So they have all their creative ducks in a row. I hope they're not just being greedy and it's not thought through. But I would imagine it is thought through. I would at least hope it is.
Well, guys, the question for you then becomes, what do you think about this announcement? Again, it's not always, in most franchises, not smart to plan the 2 films from now, and start committing money to it. But I think with the John Wick franchise, I think it's a pretty safe bet. How do you guys feel about this move? Can you think of other potential drawbacks of doing it like this? Jump down into the comment section below and let us know your thoughts. All right, guys.